Before we begin, we want to acknowledge that some stories and discussions in this episode of Radiant Resilience may touch on sensitive and potentially triggering topics. These may include themes of childhood abuse and neglect, domestic violence, mental health struggles, suicide attempt, intergenerational trauma, recovery, and healing journey. Our goal is to share real-life experiences in a respectful and empathetic manner, offering insights into the complexities of the human spirit and the journey towards resilience. However, we understand that some content might be difficult for listeners. We encourage you to prioritize your well-being and discretion when deciding to listen. Please remember this podcast is not a substitute for professional advice or support. If you find yourself needing assistance, we urge you to seek help from qualified professionals or trusted support systems. Your mental and emotional health is important to us. Thank you for your courage and for joining us in a space of understanding and compassion. Welcome back, everybody, to Radiant Resilience. I have a very interesting guest today, Juanita Wheeler. She has coached over 100 TEDx speakers, in addition to CEOs, entrepreneurs, authors, researchers, and change makers to deliver presentations worthy of their great ideas. Juanita is a public speaking coach, speechwriter, the CEO and head of curation at TEDxBrisbane, and the founder of Full and Frank. Juanita has over 2 decades of speaking experience, is an adjunct lecturer at the University of Queensland, and a global fellow with the Atlantic Fellows based out of Oxford University. Juanita has 3 master's degrees, including 2 in business and 1 in social change leadership. She's the speaking coach you want if you are serious about having your voice heard. And we're going to get more into how she got into that and having your voice heard and what that means. Welcome, Juanita. Thank you for being a guest today.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for the lovely introduction.
Yeah, so you have a great bio, so it's pretty easy. Why don't you tell us a little bit? So Juanita has an interesting life story. We're going to go back to her childhood and things like that, and then we'll work into how she became a speaking coach and has her business and all the things that she's done. So go ahead and start wherever you'd like to start, my dear.
Thank you so much. As you say, my life has had challenges. I grew up in an extremely neglectful and abusive home as a young child, which is obviously not ideal. The people that everyone should be able to trust to look after them, they weren't here for me, either my mother, who was involved in the abuse and neglect towards me, or the people who knew about it and didn't come and rescue me. It's not ideal. It's not a great situation. And it was incredibly harrowing, and that really imprints on you and who you are as a person. It's actually only in very recent years, and I turned 50 next year, in my late 40s, that the penny finally dropped. And I realized that what I'm doing now, what I'm working on now, helping other people to have their voice heard, all stems back to my childhood and not having my voice heard when I needed it, when I was trying in different ways to ask people to help me, and no one stood up and did it. So it's very interesting to me to look back at this now and go, oh, okay, that was when my purpose was formed. And someone said to me once, actually, I was getting help, because obviously this is really challenging and traumatizing. And my psychiatrist, one of the best things he ever said to me was, if you could go back and remove just one day of the abuse or the neglect, but it would mean that you're not exactly the same person that you are now, would you do it? And in an instant, I said no, because as much as I wouldn't want anyone to go through it, I recognize that's what made me who I am. And all the good that I'm now able to do in the world is because of that adversity that I overcame.
That's amazing that you were able to come to terms with that, because that's really hard. That's especially something that I would think a lot of people would want to change. But I will say that of all the people I've spoken to on this podcast and interviewed, that is very common with what everyone has gone through. And of course, there's aspects that they would change. If you've lost a loved one or something like that, obviously you would want that person back and things like that. But almost every single person I've talked to has said the same thing, that they wouldn't change it. It's their story. It's made them who they are today. And I think when you get to that point, it's you've done a lot of healing work already to get to that point, to be able to say that.
Oh, absolutely. There were years and decades of therapy before I got to that really healthy point of being able to say that. And part of that was the conversation about forgiveness. And I'm like, people will say to me, oh, you've got to want forgiveness. I'm like, no, forgiveness is very different for very different people. And it was very helpful. Again, my psychiatrist saying, forgiveness does not mean this was okay. It is nothing about the person who perpetrated this or did not come and help you when they had an obligation and a responsibility to do. Your version of forgiveness is just saying, I am not giving these people any more free rent in my brain. I am just letting that go. I am owning that I am a really great person doing good things, and I am who I am because of that, not because of what they did, but because of how I overcame it. And these people do not get any more free rent in my brain. And so that's a very healthy and completely acceptable version of forgiveness.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And that's a really hard thing to do in a lot of those situations. There are people that go their entire lives without being able to forgive the people that hurt them the most.
Yes, and I can completely understand that. And it's also not an absolute finite situation. There will be days that will be harder than others, whether that's Christmas or it's anniversary dates or whether it's somebody's birthday. Mother's Day is particularly challenging for me historically. Yes, there are always days that are going to be harder than others, or experiences. I have a lot of trouble going to the dentist because I have to lie back. I have people leaning over me, which is my mother used to suffocate me with a pillow as one of the things. So lying back in the dentist chair and having somebody over you and you not be in control is very hard. Multiple Valiums and happy gas later. Plus, I have the world's best dentist, and my life got a lot better when I opened up to them and said, here's the situation. What can you do? So they're amazing. And getting people to be in your corner is great. So my dentist, so good. I always see the same dentist, so it's always familiar faces. They give me the same dental assistant. They make sure they book it. So my poor husband or on one occasion, one of my adult sons is always there for me. All of these minor adjustments, or possibly not minor in terms of their scheduling, but people will go above and beyond if you explain why and give them context and you're appreciative. And if they don't, then you're not seeing the right people. Go find somebody else.
Absolutely, for sure. That's really interesting. It's always interesting to me how our bodies hold on to that trauma too. So you were born in Brisbane, Australia, yeah?
I was actually born in Townsville, so it's like North Queensland. Queensland is a really big state. Someone, and people lovingly, when I'm talking to my American clients and friends, will say, oh yeah, Queensland, you're the Texas of Australia. I'm like, okay. But we're a very big state. So you can drive 12 and a half hours from Brisbane, where I am, to get to Townsville, and you're still in the state of Queensland.
Okay.
But I moved here as a young child.
Okay. And do you have siblings?
I do. I have a sister and I have two additional siblings who are my half brother and sister. And then I have three step siblings.
Oh, wow. Big family. Okay. Whatever you're comfortable talking about as far as the childhood abuse and neglect, if you want to paint a picture for everybody of what you went through, and yeah, go ahead and give us some of that.
Sure. My youngest memories are of that, of my it's funny, I've only started really talking about this in the last few years, and it almost happened accidentally. I was giving an interview to a journalist for a magazine featuring here in Australia, and it was about teen parents, because I had actually said to her years earlier, the coverage you are doing of teen parents as a former teen mum is really bad. It's all doom and gloom, and it's all really terrible. I'm like, I actually know a lot of really fantastic teen mums. So if you ever want to do the story that talks and recognizes that, just give me a call and I'll hook you up. And I completely forgot that I had done that. And then 7 years later, I got the phone call. And she's, hey, remember that thing? Would you like to do it? I'm like, yes, here, let me help you out. And I was one of them. And it was in that interview, and she was talking about how I came to be a teen mum, which is always really, she was very professional, and it was very delicately and politely put, to her great credit. But it got me starting, not intentionally. I had not intended to talk about this before the interview, but it got me started talking about, oh, well, as a teenager, like there had always been abuse and violence in my house when I was young. They're my earliest memories. Eventually, my mother was not, I think it's not hers, is not my story to tell,
Yeah.
but I think there had been a lot of trauma in her life, and she'd had some adversity. And I think that manifested in mental health issues that went largely undiagnosed.
Mm,
And I think there had been multiple generations of violence.
mm,
So it was absolutely intergenerational that this is being passed on, which was the proudest thing in my life that I will ever do, despite all my accomplishments and 3 master's degrees and running a business and all of those things, will be that I stopped that. Like mine is the
yes.
generation where that ends. There is no neglect or intergenerational violence that have been passed on to my 3 sons. They are all
Mm,
fantastic, safe, and they know what's right and what's wrong.
mm,
And they will go on, should they choose to have families of their own, I am absolutely confident that they will be fantastic parents. But yeah, so there was intergenerational violence, and I think underdiagnosed and untreated mental issues. But so that was very challenging. Eventually, in my house, it was not uncommon. There would be knives and stabbing and people hitting people with cars and people choking people. And it
mm.
was very violent. Like, to say it was
Wow.
extremely violent, and you just never knew what was happening. And that was, of course, what was happening that you were witnessing. But then to me, the violence was, it was quite insidious and sinister. Sometimes you would try to explain it, and you say, sometimes she will come in and she will sit in my room or on the end of my bed, and she will just stare at me. And I'll wake up and she'll just stare at me. And when you're trying to convey to somebody, and as a child, you don't really have the words to say how terrifying that is. But as an adult, you can go, okay, that's not right. But then also there would be problems. She would tell me she poisoned my food. I have no idea if she poisoned my food. I'm sure that. And then sometimes she'd be sick after the food. And you're like, now as an adult, I'm like, was I sick because she told me there was
Mm.
something wrong with it, or was there actually something wrong with it? You never
Oh
know.
my goodness.
And then I remember once going to a pediatrician appointment because I was grotesquely underweight, and I'm very short. I'm 4'10", so I'm very under height, and I was always in the lowest percentile. And I remember being at a pediatric appointment with, my mother had taken me at a specialist, and they do a bone X-ray and work out what's going on, and they weigh you and do the percent, all of the things. And they're like, she should be this height, and she's this, and she's clearly not eating, and there's a problem with what's going on. And he's medically, there's nothing wrong. And then I remember him sitting and talking to me, and my mother was next to me, and is there anything wrong? Is there anything you need to tell us about what's the problem? And kudos for asking the question, but don't ask the question. This, of course, is back in the 80s, when the person is saying, what do you say? You're like
Yeah.
terrified of what's going to happen when you go home if you
Yeah.
say this. And also, what if they don't believe you? What if they laugh you off? What if you go back there?
Yeah. And
It
how
was
old
not
were you
particularly
at this
helpful.
point?
I think at that point in time, when I had that scan, I think I did one at 8 and one at 10,
You're
because it was
still
at that
pretty
point in
young.
time they were saying you need to get, we can give her growth hormones, and then she will get to maybe 5'2", maybe, if we try and remedy this now. And then if we work out how to make sure she eats properly, so she's getting food. And I remember my mother saying, no, I'm 5 foot, so if you give her growth hormones, she'll be taller than me. We're not doing that. So
Oh,
doing her growth hormones.
whoa, God
Um,
forbid.
yes.
Jeez.
Anyway, that went on. And then my father eventually left the home when I was 10, early Christmas morning.
And was the
And then,
abuse from both of your parents then?
y- look, I think the thing I usually say, my mother is no longer with us. So she's passed away. My father is alive. But the thing I would say when asked that is, he was living in a war zone, living with my mother. And
Yeah.
that's not to say the things that he did were in any way acceptable. But
Yeah.
I think when you're living in a war zone, it wasn't till I was about 16 or 17. When I was 17, I got to the point where I hit her. And just because in one instance, I just went, oh my gosh, I just have to get out. She was barring the door. She'd locked the windows. She key locked everything, deadlocked it. I couldn't get out of the house,
Oh my God.
and hit her to knocked her out to get the keys to escape. And at that point in time, I had never understood any violence being perpetrated against either party, really. And then I went, okay, there is a point, right or wrong, where humans get to a point where you're like, this is, in the moment, this is the only option available to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're
It,
defending yourself and fight or flight, and you've got to figure something
100%.
out. Yeah.
So I left, and at that point in time, I never went back because I was like, okay, this would be bad. It was fraught. I think when I was 16, I had this moment where I realized no one was ever coming to save me. I would phone people. I would explain to them what was going on. People knew she was unwell, and no one would do anything about it. Meanwhile, at school, you're trying to appear normal in every way possible because you want to fit in. That is your
Yeah.
only safe space. You want to be normal. But looking back now as an adult and as a parent, I'm like, how on earth did people not pick up that one semester she's topping the grade and then the next semester she's like never here and failing subjects or scraping by with C's? There should have been a lot of red flags. I think today, many years later, decades later, I would hope that the situation in schools is way better than it was at the time. But it wasn't a good situation. And then at 16, I had the moment where I realized I'm never no one's coming to save me. And that was a really profound and terrible realization that no one was ever coming to save me. It didn't matter which relatives I phoned or calls to my father, or no one was coming to save me. So I at this moment, I remember it really profoundly. I thought either she's going to kill me or I am going to lose it and kill her. And my only other option, and both of those are unacceptable to me, because if she kills me, she wins. If I kill her, I'm going to end up in juvie or prison, and that doesn't rock my world and at all. Or the only other option to me was, because I was certain I wasn't going to make it to 18. I am not going to live to be 18 and get to leave this house. So I thought the only option left to me was to end it myself. So at 16, I downed a whole bottle of pills and thought, this is my way out, because I just can't take it anymore. And I was really worried that I hadn't done it well enough. So I got on a bus to go somewhere else to get some more pills. And not being aware of drugs was not my thing. There was some stuff in the house. I took it. And a friend of mine from school found me on a bus, like deliriously and out of it. Her mother was a nurse. So she took me home to her mother's house, and they got me to an emergency room, and my stomach was pumped and I lived. I was not happy with her about that for a very long time. I've subsequently said, thank you. Thank you. Everything I do now, in some way, all the good I do in life, you have a part in that, because if I had died, it wouldn't have happened. So thank you. And my children thank you, and my husband thanks you, and all the people I help in the world thank you. So huge shout out, Angela. Great job.
Thank you, Angela.
It was harrowing. And I remember waking up in the hospital and just being so bereft that it hadn't worked and that I was still here. And my father was actually there. And I remember him saying to the doctors that I'm going to take her home, which I, at the time, thought, oh my gosh, finally, he's going to take me home to his place.
Yeah.
And he was like, no, he drove me and he dropped me off at my mother's house. And it was just, okay. But the good part about that, apart from the not dying bit, is that as a result of that's when I started going and seeing this amazing psychiatrist. And at the time, I was not happy about it. This is like a compulsory forced thing.
Okay.
You're a little bit crazy. There was suicide attempt involved. And I'm like, no one had helped me. I had no trust in anyone because no adult in my life had ever stepped in and helped me. And it was very frustrating. So there was no trust there. But eventually I went on. So in the context of that journalism interview, when she said, how did this happen? And one of the things I said was, look, I would go out and go on dates with people. I would sleep with people so I could go and stay in their house because their house was safer than my house. And that was, to me, that was just strategically good thinking. And it took years as well to say, there is absolutely nothing wrong with you, what you did. There can't be any moral judgments or ethics applied to that. This is, what do you need to do to survive tonight, tomorrow night, whenever? And that was a good exchange of services that resulted in, I'm alive, I lived through it. But one of the consequences of that, contraception aside, doesn't always work, is that I have the most wonderful, my eldest son, 17 and pregnant, and thought, okay, now it'll be him and I. And my husband and I, we've now been together 31 years,
Oh,
married
wow.
27. Absolutely love of my life. I'm still madly besotted. We have 3 amazing sons, all adults. But yes, so it came out talking about the abuse was first happened as part of this interview with a
Mhm.
trusted journalist. And to her great credit, she said at the end of it, after we talked, she goes, I'm just going to let you sit with that for a bit. I'll call you back in a few days and see how you feel
Oh,
about that. Because I understand you said more than you had intended to say.
yeah.
So let me come back to you, which is how you're dealing with a very ethical and professional journalist. And she did, to her great credit. And I had talked to my husband and my kids in the interim, and they're like, no, that's fine. That we 100% support you, which is how you know you've raised really great humans.
Yeah.
And then it was like, okay, cool. So it was really unintentional. There was no like decision, I'm going to talk about this publicly now. It just happened. But it was amazing after that happened, people who reached out and said, this has been my experience and I've never spoken about it. Or similarly, what should I do? And I'm like, look, I am not a counselor. I am not a psychiatrist. Go and get help. But here's what worked for me. Getting help helps. Like getting help from people who are qualified to help. Make sure you go and see somebody who's got specialist areas in trauma. They're not just your regular marriage counselor or something. These are very qualified people because it's a very specific area of therapy to get.
Yep.
She was great. And then so it got published and people spoke about it. And it was funny, shortly after I was revisiting a TED talk by Anne Lamott. And I was rewatching it, and it was like the 12 things she's learned by the time she turned 60. And one of the things she talks about is, as a writer and author, is about the struggle of sitting down and writing. And when your story involves other people, because I think part of the reason I didn't talk about it for so long is it does tangentially touch the lives of other people who are still alive.
Yeah.
And one of the things that she says, and I sometimes there will be times when I touch on this and I just stick it back up on the wall, and it's your story, so it's your story to tell. And if people wanted you to write or say better things about them, they should have treated you better.
That's
Uh,
true. Yeah.
and I'm just like, mic drop. Yes. So that's what guides me now. And remembering there's this profound moment when you go, you know what, this is not my secret to keep. I didn't do anything wrong. So
For
I
sure.
don't have to keep this a secret. And yes, if people wanted me to write or say better things about them, they should have treated me better. If you look bad, if you feel you look bad based on your actions, that's about your actions and not about someone finally talking about the impact it had in their lives.
Yeah. So this all went on till you were 17, 18 then? Did you leave when you got pregnant?
I left before then, so I found out that I was pregnant after I'd left home. So yes, I was 17. I basically stayed till I had finished school, and then because I couldn't go and live with my father, that was not an option for me with his new family, and I had no other options. And I was one of the good things that I had going in my life was I was at a very good school. The private school fees were being paid. This all happens. It's important. People sometimes think that this is a class thing or it's a culture thing. It only happens in those cultures, or it only happens on the wrong side of the tracks or the low socioeconomic parts of town. No, all of this was going on behind a beautiful 4-bedroom brick architecturally designed home in the suburbs. And the neighbors were aware of the fighting and the yelling and the police cars
Yeah.
rocking up periodically. This is not a secret that no one knows about. When family are aware and all of those things, they had been at different times. My mother had been, someone had picked her up and taken her to mental wards at hospitals. This is not some nobody knows there's a problem. It was
Right.
more, we can't take her kids away from her. And really, it was only me was the one that was experiencing this problem. I was not. For whatever reason, I was targeted. And that's not uncommon, actually, with abuse in families, that there will be one person that is the victim and other people are, that wasn't my experience. That didn't happen to me. And that's fine.
So
Um,
interesting.
but this is what happened to me. Yeah, it's challenging, but yeah, you go on. And actually, it's more than go on. I think all of that made me who I am. So yes, I left when I realized I finished school and I can't stay here or I will become violent. There was one instance and I'm like, wow, okay, cool. It was shocking and obviously the violence over the years changed. So sometimes as you become stronger and older and it takes different forms. So when I was younger, it was very overt and never when anyone's around. The verbal abuse maybe, but not the physical stuff, not the life-threatening stuff. She would, when I was in the bath, if she was really mad, she would plug in a hairdryer
Oh
in the
my God.
bathroom and then she would swing it and let it go. And I didn't know until the point where it dropped and I would hear it either on the bathroom mat or on the tiles, whether it was not a good situation. It would be fair to say.
Oh, just a couple examples that, and then you said she tried to suffocate you with a pillow.
She was not well.
Yeah.
She was not well, but that doesn't make it okay. It doesn't make it okay for what I experienced, and people should have stepped in and they did not. Having said all of that, who I am and who I've become is all as a result of those experiences. I wouldn't wish those experiences on my children
Yeah,
or
of
anybody
course.
else,
Of
but I
course.
wouldn't surrender any of them if
Mm,
it in any way changed me in the slightest way, because I've come through that. I've learned that. I've learned who I am. I understand resilience, strength, formidable power to do things, agency.
mm,
It took lots and lots of work, lots of therapy. My family are incredible that have come along the journey. It's been 30, 40 years now. But yes, you get there and you do the work and the work works, the help helps.
yeah.
And now I go and help other people in their lives to have their voice heard. And that's an incredibly powerful gift because every person, and generally I work with people who are like leaders in their field or change
Mm,
makers who have brilliant ideas that in their particular area of genius and industry or change making, they are going to make an enormous difference if they can
mm,
just have their voice heard. And usually people will say, I'm afraid of public speaking. They're not afraid of public speaking. They're afraid of 26 other things. Like they're afraid that what their peers will think. They're afraid that they will flop. They're afraid that the terrible things people said to them as young children will be proven true if they
mm.
don't succeed. So my background helps all of those people get to where they need to be to champion their idea to the world. And then every person who's helped by their great idea, I've played a part in that. And that's a
Yeah.
really exciting way to put what happened to you to very positive use to make the world better. It doesn't mean that it was okay that happened or
Sure.
that it was okay that no one came, but man, there is great power in turning that around and saying, you did this, guess what? I'm going to do this with it.
So how did you overcome that? You said lots of therapy, but is there a point when you look back on it where you're like, oh, that's when things changed? And what did you do to get there?
I think the first answer is the right one. Lots of therapy and intensively at the start. And then just not being afraid to go back and have, it's like going back for an oil change now and then. I might not be there for 3 years, but if something happens and you feel, oh, that was a little bit, to use the term triggering, like a trip to the dentist or something happens or
Yeah.
somebody dies that just brings it all up, or you go to a funeral and you're standing at a family funeral and you look around the room and here are 30 people who did not come and help you. So you're like, okay, might just go back for a little oil change and a tune up, because a lot of those events you don't go to. You just don't go to because that's not
Yeah.
going to help you. But sometimes the benefit of going outweighs the pain. Get help. So yes, doing that. I think the other thing, and it was a great thing, had a great shrink. So he says a lot of different things that have been helpful. One of the other things he said was, your family starts with you. The day you turn 18, you decide who your family is. So up until that point in time, you don't really have any agency or choice. Your family is your family. It's like the day you turn 18, you then get to decide whose calls you don't return, which events you don't go to, who is or is not in your life. That is
Yeah.
100% on you. So he said, so start with you. Your tree is not this. Don't think of your tree as all these people up here that have come down to me. It says you got to flip that. Your tree starts with you and
Okay.
you grow your tree. So what do you want your family to be? Pick a partner who you're going, this is the most amazing person, and we are going to build this formidable, wonderful, loving, supportive family together, and we're going to start the tree. So you are at the top of the tree and you're growing it down. Who do you want to be a partner in that? If that's something you're interested in your life, if you want to be single and solo forever, rock on, your choice.
Yeah.
If you're looking for that, grow your tree. Work out, who do you want in your tree? And that can start with, what do I not want to
Mm,
be the feeling, the vibes, the activities of my tree? And it informs almost everything. But yeah, that's really powerful. So if you're over 18 or the day you turn 18, you decide.
mm.
So I don't have to have that person in my life. I can just say, thank you. No, I'm just going to take a step back. Thank you so much. You get to decide who your family is. And your family doesn't have to be biological. Your family can be friends. It can be a whole range of people. It can be fur babies, whatever makes you
Yeah.
happy and gives your life joy and purpose. But you decide. And I think there's an incredible power in that. And
Yeah.
knowing that I don't, just by fluke of biology, have to keep these people in my life who do not add value and actually probably cause me angst. There
Mm.
is no reason to do that. But if you do it, don't complain about it. You've chosen to do it. Which was the stick part of the carrot with that lesson. You get to choose. Are you over 18? Did you choose to pick up that phone call, return that phone call, go to that event where you knew that person would be? Cool. Then don't complain about it, because you've made that choice to have that person in your family because you are
Mm.
over 18. And I'm like, okay, which was the loving little slap that of wisdom that said, yeah, no, okay, cool. Yeah, I decided. And that was highly predictable that would happen. And I still returned the call. So that's 100% on me, because I am over 18.
Mm. I think it's really hard with family to put those boundaries in place, though. Obviously, in your situation, you were very wronged in your family, and that is well justified. But I will say it is hard. I can do boundaries really well with friends and coworkers and things like that, and even my husband, but boundaries with family is really hard. And that I don't think anybody wants to be estranged from their family members, but it's definitely sometimes for the better of your own mental health.
Absolutely. And I think it's really interesting when I have these conversations with people, and I said very the same thing to my psychiatrist, and I know other people have said the things, and the thing that usually comes back is, okay, that's a social construct there.
Mm,
Because if you can do it with other people, and you can't do it with them, what is it? Do you feel this? Is it, what is making you feel that way? Is it obligation? Is it
mm,
the perception or the fear of what other family members will say? Will they, and how they will receive you setting these boundaries? What is it that makes it okay and you can do it with your husband, your friends, colleagues, but
yeah.
you can't do it over here? And have a really strong look at that. And often what that is will be because of the unhealthy situation. You've seen
Yeah.
them lash out, or you've seen other people lash out or treat other people badly. And so the bad behavior or the bad expectations, which are the problem, are the reason you don't step away. And
Mm,
then that's just a really dangerous loop to be in. And I think with family, like, it doesn't have to be a go, no go. It doesn't have to be you're in my family or out of my family, but it can be, do you know what? Collectively, we agree we'll see that person once a year. And we'll
mm,
only do that in a group setting. And please don't leave me alone when we're in that room.
yeah.
But do you know what are the code words? And there's little tips, like when you're at a family event and you have to go and there are going to be these people there, always walk around with two glasses, whether it's champagne, mimosas, juice, whatever it is, but always walk around with two glasses. And the reason is, so if you need to make an escape, you can say, I've got these two drinks. I just need to take this drink over to Aunt Emily, and you can make your
Oh.
escape. Never, ever find yourself at a family event if there's someone there who could cause you angst or stress and not have two drinks in your hand.
Mm. I love that
Tip.
advice. Yeah, that's great. So, was there some of your extended family that you now have a relationship with, or?
There is some. So I think she's technically my second cousin, but we're like cousins in Sydney, so down south. So I don't see her as often as I like, but she's
Mm.
amazing and I love her dearly. And she's the kind of person that you would drop everything and do something for. It's so funny. She lives in a different city, and she now has a beautiful son of her own. They are
Mm.
just the most lovely human beings, wild, life loving, free spirits. love them. And but he's a long way away, so it's hard to bond when we're living in different cities. But you'd like to have is akin to having a nephew. And so we developed when we were down visiting in Sydney and he was quite young, he was distressed because his mum had to go to the counter for something. And so I
Mm.
grabbed some hot chips, some fries off the table, and I said, "Oh, I think I've got the biggest one." It was very tiny. And he's, "Oh," and he picks up a really big chip and he's, "No," and he's, "I've got the biggest one." I'm like, "Oh, you win." So we started playing this chippy game every time we do something. And so I will invariably, sometimes it's weekly, sometimes it's monthly, I will get this random photo appear in my phone sent to me of him holding a ginormous chip. But it's this
I love
wonderful
that.
way to develop relationships with people that if you're not in the same city with younger children. But yes, there are some people in my extended family. I've got some cousins. Generally speaking, the ones I have great relationships are all younger. So these are people who are my age or younger who weren't around, who couldn't have done
Yeah.
anything, who didn't dismiss it. I think everyone who is in the older generations who knew, who did nothing, even if they say they didn't know, they knew something, that's always going to be harder. And I don't really have those relationships.
Yeah, I would imagine that would be harder. And since you were talking about intergenerational abuse, was there other abuse going on in the extended family that you were aware of, or not really?
I know that my mother, when she was alive, said that she had been abused by people in the family
Right.
and her side of the family. So by the time I was a child, we didn't really have anything to do with her parents, for example.
Mm,
Um, so there had already been some removal there. So I'm not really part of that side of the family's
yeah.
life. That there are some people in that side of the family who are amazing, young, professional, talented, wonderful humans. I am sure that's just not part of my life. As I said, we very much went with you're the top of the tree, start here,
Yeah.
grow down. So I'm incredibly fortunate. My husband, myself, our three sons, they're all fabulous humans that I have
Mm,
been graced with. So our family unit is just a delight.
I love
And
that.
it's funny, my husband loved them as children. My husband and I are diametrically opposite, not in terms of values and ethics, but in terms of style. So he's grown up in a very nurtured and supportive family. It's like the Waltons, I always joke. So he's very and supportive and caring and empathetic. And I'm
Mm,
more, what's the problem? Let's solve it. Let's get it done. So
yeah.
the kids learnt very quickly growing up that if something's gone wrong, you want someone to put your arm around your shoulder, put a band-aid on your knee and tell you it's going to be okay, go to dad. If you want someone to go, cool, what's the plan? How are we going to do this
Yeah.
differently next? How are we going to win? How are we going to get this accomplished and tick this off and feel really good about it? Then come to me. But collectively, like as a unit, it's just wonderful. So he enjoyed them as children. I love them as adults. There has been hardly any greater joy in my life than getting to know my children now as adults, who
Mm.
they've become, what they love, what they're passionate about, to see them out in the world, to see the support and the love and the championing they do of friends and colleagues and people they mentor. It's a delight.
Oh, I love that. Being a cycle breaker is huge, absolutely huge. So I think it's amazing that you were able to do that and that your family is loving and caring and everybody's close. It sounds lovely. Tell me about Mother's Day. Let's talk about Mother's Day for you.
Yeah. Historically, I had up until a couple of years ago, I'd never celebrated Mother's Day.
Mm.
It still continues to be like it's a challenging day. When
Yeah.
I was still living at home, particularly as a child, when my father was still there up until I was 10, you would have those things where there would be a stall at the school and you have everyone goes and spends 50 cents and makes a card for their mother and gets a little gift. And I was not a fan. I remember being from a young age thinking, my assessment was she did not deserve to be celebrated. She's not doing a good
Sure.
job. And it felt really bad I remember having this sense of I shouldn't be doing this as we would
Mm.
do the celebrating, and I didn't like it. And then later, after my father had left, and so we were the only ones there, and I was the eldest of the two, and it felt like I didn't want to do it. And I remember I didn't the first year and there was trouble as a result of it about being
Mm.
disrespectful and not doing the thing. So I'm like, okay, cool. What is the minimum I can do in subsequent years to appear like I'm ticking this box, but not actually feel that I've been a traitor to myself
Mm.
in acknowledging good. This was fraught growing up. And I remember I was 18 when I and had my eldest Joseph as a baby, the first Mother's Day. And I remember thinking, okay, this didn't magically get better. Mother's Day
Wow.
didn't magically become this wonderful, magical thing because I'm now a mother. Like, it was
Mm.
still all there. And really, it's a sense of loss. I don't go to the shops. I'm better about it in recent years, but I didn't want to go to the shops because everywhere is littered with Hallmark versions of motherhood and stalls everywhere and smiling mothers and daughters, and that's all over the TV, and it's the every ad, and
Mhm.
then later social media, it's just everywhere. And once you get social media now, it's just like a treasure trove of people talking about their amazing mothers, and I'm like, yeah, okay. And I'm very happy that everyone has that, but it's just a
Yeah.
reminder that you
Yeah.
didn't have any of that. And really, it's not anger, it's a sense of loss. It's this is
Yes.
something that should have been part of my life, and you're
Mm.
mourning that it wasn't. And it definitely, I would try to fake it for the sake of my sons that it was good. They would come home with like Mother's Day cards and things, and you
Mm.
smile and try to be lovely about it. But at the same time, you're like, yeah, this doesn't make me feel good. But you would fake it. And I'm sure my faking it was successful to various degrees at different times.
Yeah.
So yes, so I did that. And then it wasn't till I think it was about 2 or 3 years ago, I got asked by my high school alumni committee to come to that. They do a beautiful Mother's Day lunch, and it's a boarding school as well as a school for day girls. And so a whole chunk of the mothers from all around remote areas of Australia come for this one event to
Oh,
connect with
wow.
each other, to bond, to meet with their children, to visit. It's a really beautiful event. And they reached out to me and said, would you like to be our keynote speaker for our big Mother's Day luncheon? And my gut instinct was like, oh my gosh, no, like I would be the worst person ever to speak at this
Oh,
event. But then I thought about it for a second. I went, actually, there are some things I've learned about motherhood and Mother's Day
yeah.
that might be of value. So I gave him a brief heads up and said, okay, I could, but this is what I would be saying and talking about.
Mhm.
And the actual transcript of that speech is on my website. But in essence, what I said was, look, just briefly to give you context, this is a little bit about what happened to me. And I'm here at this Mother's Day lunch telling you I have never in my life celebrated Mother's Day except
Mhm.
when doing so under duress. And here are the things I've learned. And some of those things were every Mother's Day experience is different. You have people who've lost their mothers who had beautiful mothers. You had people who've lost their mothers who, thank goodness that's over. They were really not good people in their lives. You've got people who are mothers who have lost their children, and it's traumatizing for them, and it's a very sad day. You've got people who have tried to be mothers forever and can't. You've got people whose mothers are beautiful and separated them from them geographically or
Yeah.
for a range of reasons. No one Mother's Day scenario is the same for everybody.
Yeah.
So we've got to move away from this idea that there is this right way to celebrate Mother's Day. There is no one right way, or that everyone who will automatically feel the same way about Mother's Day. That's not right. And then I talked about the other thing we need to recognize is like being a mother is really hard. And if you're
Absolutely.
saying it's super easy, then generally speaking, you're either some amazing robot, cyborg super mother, or you're lying, or you're trying to sell somebody something. Like being a
Mm.
mom is hard.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
yes, celebrate and champion that. And other mothers aren't the enemy. There's a whole chunk of parts of society and some parts of commerce where their job is to make you as a mother feel better about than those other mothers. Like you're doing it right, they're doing it wrong. Other mothers are not the enemy, and women should support women. I love that Madeleine
Yes.
Albright quote. There's a special room reserved in hell for women who don't support women. I can't feel the
Mm.
same way by extension applies to mothers. So if you know another
Mhm.
mother and you can help her in any way, do. Yeah, so my Mother's Day journey had been fairly fraught, and then I went and gave this speech, and in writing this speech I had the cathartic moment where I went, do you know what? I think I've done a pretty reasonable job. I think my sons would tell you I've done a pretty reasonable job. I think it's okay now to start celebrating Mother's Day. It's always going to be fraught. I will always tap out of social media around those days
Mm.
and not be on it because you just
Yeah.
don't, it's not a healthy thing to do. So stay away from things that don't make you feel good. But yeah, so I'm now celebrating it. And I think that's been a wonderful change, and change is growth. So
Yeah,
I'm still doing
absolutely.
it 47, 48, 49, and I hope I do it till I'm 100 or however long I manage to be here. Growth is good. Do it. But yes, Mother's Day, we really need to stop thinking there is a one size fits all situation with that.
Yes.
And I've become far more aware of all of the different people who,
Mhm.
it was interesting. After I gave that speech, a lot of people came up and spoke to me. A lot of them spoke about how they themselves had experienced some kind of abuse or neglect, either as a child or as an adult woman. But I also had people come and talk to me about, yes, I almost didn't come to this Mother's Day event because I'm this kind of mother or this kind of mother, or I want to be a mother, but I can't yet. And I haven't made it work, or whatever the thing was. It was so fraught. I think more than 80% of the room wasn't sure they were going to be there and didn't
Mm.
feel like they fit under the perfect definition of mother. And I'm like,
Oh,
that's a problem, isn't it? These are not the outliers. This is the
yeah.
majority of people saying,
Yeah.
I'm not made to, I don't feel like I fit what is the acceptable boundaries of being a good mom.
Yeah. I have struggled with infertility for many years. So Mother's Day has been very triggering for me and very difficult. But it's also been a difficult balance for me because I do have a wonderful mother that I would like to celebrate. I have a wonderful mother-in-law that I would like to celebrate. And I struggle to celebrate them on those days even. And it is nothing they have done. It is all me, but I feel guilty a lot of the times for not wanting to do that. And I have said to my mom in the past few years, can we celebrate it on a different day? Can we go just a different day to have lunch? Because you go to brunch at a restaurant. And I remember there was one time I went with my whole family, and this one restaurant handed out flowers to each mother at the table. So my mom got one, my grandma got one, my sister got one, and I sat there and cried. It was
100%. Oh
awful.
my gosh. Just it's don't do it to yourself. Just don't. It's not good. And no one benefits from that situation. Just don't do it. So I was going to say, I'm glad you said, can we do it a different day? I know somebody who has a very similar story,
Mhm.
and we were talking to her about it. And so we talked for a while over coffee. I said, her mum's name was Ruby. I said, why don't you just pitch to your mum that you're going to have a Ruby Rocks Day? And it's going to be a totally
Hmm.
different time of the year. Ask her what her favorite time of the year is and what her
Ah.
favorite thing is. And she goes, oh, I love spring. Spring is my favorite time of year, which in Australia is not when our Mother's Day is.
Forget your guys' is a different time. Everybody's is slightly different. I think Canada has a different one and stuff too.
Absolutely. So she gets her own day. She doesn't have to share it with all the other mothers of the world. And it's like
Mm.
Ruby Rocks is her day. And they go and do whatever she wants and they just celebrate her. And it's been lovely. I think they've done it for 1 or 2 years now, but it's just become a thing. And that'll become a thing with her family and extended things. And it's like just this, because she's going to tap out of something that doesn't make her feel good and makes her feel bad.
Yeah.
And when she
Yeah.
explained it, like it went really well. And they do lovely things. So they do the cards and the flowers and all the things for Ruby Rocks days.
That.
It's far away from Mother's Day. It's almost
Yeah.
diametrically opposed part of the calendar. And then she goes and does things that make her happy as well on around the Mother's Day weekend. So she'll go away. She'll go away
Mhm.
like somewhere to a cabin or just somewhere where she can not have the phones, not be at the shops. And
Yeah.
she gets off social media. She doesn't need to see it because you
Yeah.
just don't need to. Just do
Yeah.
exercise some radical self-care.
Yeah. It's
Um,
really hard. And I think there was one year that one of the first years that I was like, that's it. I am shutting my phone off today. And I told everybody that I know, and I was like, don't freak out if I don't text you back or I don't, whatever. And my husband was working that day, and I literally had a me day.
yeah.
I baked at the house. I did all these things. I watched movies. I think I read my book, I did all these things. And it was like a great day. And then it wasn't until the late evening that I turned my phone back on. I still didn't go on social media that day, but yeah, you really have to recognize that stuff when it's triggering and take care of yourself, because that stuff's hard.
Yeah, I think also there are some businesses now who are doing some fabulous things. So Canva, the online design platform, they won me as a customer for life a few years ago, and they do it every year. But like, I got an email in my inbox, and it was about 3 weeks ahead of Mother's Day. So there was a good window. So I was still, checking these things. And it basically said, we understand for some Mother's Day can be really, they didn't say triggering, but that's what they meant. And, a difficult time. So if you would like to tap out of all Mother's Day's event, all our Mother's Day email, just tick this box and you won't hear from us on this topic again. You can always go into your settings later and add it back in if you'd like to. So I ticked that box and I never got anything from them. And I'm like, winner, I will be a Canva customer for life, because
Yes.
how respectful is that?
Yes.
And I just went, that just shows a level of awareness and understanding and empathy, not to mention business savvy, because, oh, so smart, so good, so authentic, so respectful. I went, excellent. And in recent years, I've seen a few more companies do it. And I
Yeah,
always
same.
tick that box and I just think, well played.
Yeah. Yeah, I love it. I started getting a couple of those either last year or the year before. So that was a new thing, but it's so nice because you get the Mother's Day emails and all the things, and it's tough. It's really hard for a lot of situations. I have one of my very best friends lost her mom to cancer she was in her 20s, I think, when she lost her mom. And so she is a mom herself, but same thing. She really struggles with Mother's Day because she wishes her mom was here. And even though she's being celebrated, I love that you touched on all the different walks of how challenging that day is for people, because it is tough.
It is really tough. I think one of the toughest it's not an Olympics or a competition, but one of the things that really
Ah.
stood out with me, one of my clients I previously worked with was a children's hospice. So part of my job was we were trying to get a children's hospice here in Queensland. So we had a state the size of Texas and no children's hospices. So it was an enormous problem. And so I would go and speak with the mothers and the families who had either lost a child or had a child with a life-limiting condition. And we would be talking about the stories. So we could go and present this to philanthropists and government funders and such to help them advocate and tell their stories, both for agency, but also to get this hospice funding for this hospice to get up and going. But through that journey, you can't unhear those stories. You would help them craft them. You would listen to their stories and then give them back speeches. And there was this one woman, a lot of them, but one in particular, and she just got the script back that I'd written for her for a speech. She was giving it at a gala and she just cried and cried. And she just said, this is exactly how I would have said my story if I knew how to tell my story. But I remember thinking of her, and I always think of her every Mother's Day, having lost her son. And they said he might live for a few hours, but he lived for 11 days. And she was in a maternity ward because we didn't have a children's hospice, surrounded by people who were being brought flowers and babies crying. And she just had to, and she was like, they told her, you can't feed him, you can't delay his life any 11 days of that. But I think of her, I think of all of these other people I know who, whether it's infertility, whether it's the loss of a child, whether it's traumatizing roles with their parents, whether it's loss of a loved parent or separation, whether it's people who, gay dads who, for Mother's Day, sometimes it's an opportunity for people who don't like them very much to have a dig about the fact that there's no mother in their family. There is every kind of permutation about why that day can be difficult for people. So yes, we just have to be better humans. Part of that and part of the work I do with people is we all can become a little bit better, but we have to know these stories, because if we don't know the stories, then we don't have an understanding of why it's difficult. And that was really a part also of me deciding, you know what, I'm actually going to talk about this now, because not my secret, and Lamont, if they wanted me to say better things, they should have treated me better. But also every time I talk about it, I have people who go, thank you so much, I needed to hear that. Or, hey, I've had a similar story. Or I now realize it's not my secret, the thing that happened to me. And I should tell my story, because then hopefully it won't happen to somebody else. I'm like, great, go own your story.
Yes. And that is the whole premise of why I started this podcast too, because through my infertility, I had many moments of feeling very alone and in a very dark space. And my hope is that people sharing their stories on here will help somebody listening who's been quiet about it or doesn't feel comfortable coming forth about it. Just know that they're not alone, and that we're all going through something. Everybody's struggled with something, or is struggling with something. And I hope that it builds more compassion in people too. That's my goal, because I agree with you. The more you know about these people's stories, and then realizing that normal people are going through this stuff all the time. It's not just this one person or that one person. Like, it's all over the place. And I just hope people don't feel alone because it's scary to be, that's when you get to the rock bottom and scary places in your brain for sure.
Absolutely. I absolutely commend you for doing it. I think it's
Thank
really
you.
important. I think owning your story, knowing that it's your story to tell. Not everyone has to agree with your story, but if
Mm,
the story of how you experienced it and what happened to you, and there is great power and agency in just putting it into words, even if it's for yourself. But
yeah.
then if you get to the point where you can share it with others, then the potential benefits of that can compound. Somebody in the world needs to hear your story right now.
Yeah.
It would
Yes.
make their day better. It could change their life. It could
Mm,
on potentially save their life.
yes.
So there is absolutely somebody, at least one person in the world that needs to hear your story
Mm,
right now. Own it and then work out how to share it.
mm. And a lot of working out how to share it is working through it to get to
Well,
that point to be able to share it. Yeah.
exactly. You've got to be in a place where talking about it is helpful
Mhm.
and not hurtful.
Yes.
And for me, I left that house at 17 and I was not publicly sharing it till about 3 or 4 years ago,
Mhm.
based on saying something to a journalist more than I
Yeah.
had intended. That's many decades later.
Yeah.
So for some people, it could be a year from their
Yeah.
experience and they're ready to talk about it. For some people, talking about it publicly is a really big part of their healing journey.
Mhm.
So they might start it sooner than others. But for others, they need to get to a place where they feel, okay, I'm ready to do it. My only tip would be you're never going to feel 100% ready. So if you're waiting for that, it's
Yeah.
never going to happen. You're never going to feel 100% comfortable about it because whatever reasons, concerns, doubts, fears, shame, societal expectations, all of these things, there's never going to be the perfect time.
Yeah.
But get to the point where you think of, am I comfortable in enough that talking about this is not going to do me any harm? I'm in a good enough place that this won't harm me, but that I can actually get to a point where I know I'm going to feel really good about the fact that there is someone in the world who needs to hear this and I just help them.
Yes. Oh, I love that. Tell me a little bit about what working with you is like as far as being telling people, teaching people how to speak in public. And it sounds like you do some writing of speeches as well. If somebody wanted to work with you or whatever, what does that look like?
So the first thing I say to people is if you leave your house and you speak when you're out in public, you're already public speaking. So let's just work out how to do it really well because there's all different types of public speaking. Sometimes it's public speaking with your boss or to your local PNC, or it's in pitching for new sales, new clients, new business, and sometimes it's on prestigious TEDx stages. All of those are different and important. I work with people who, generally speaking, are either trying to fast track their career and they understand that building their personal brand, either in working for other people or if they're looking to then go and start their own business or they have their own business and they're trying to grow it, establishing, consolidating, and amplifying their position as a leader, their personal brand, public speaking will do that. It
Oh,
will
wow.
say, listen to this person, they're an expert. When you get booked on stages and a peak industry group or a conference or someone who's respected says, this is one of our speakers, they're saying you're an expert. So getting those gigs and then getting up and delivering them really well, fantastic for your personal brand and your career growth. So really important to do. And the people who I work with typically have really great ideas. Maybe they've never shared them with anyone outside of the
Mm,
shower or the lounge room or their cubicle, but they have really great ideas and they understand the power of public speaking. They understand why it's so important and they're just not doing their ideas justice.
mm,
Maybe they're writing really great things in writing, but they just need the help to get up and persuade people to say yes.
mm,
Because the public speaking I work on is not after dinner toasts and wedding speeches. That's great. That's not me. I am all about when you speak, what do you want them to say yes to, that audience? So is it
mm,
yes to buying your products or services? Is it yes to changing a piece of legislation?
mm,
Is it yes to a partnership deal, a distribution agreement, a merger and acquisition? It doesn't matter what the yes is, but it's about how do you use public speaking to persuade people to do it. So that involves Understanding your strategy. I work with speakers to develop where should they be speaking, what's their strategy, what's their objective, help them with applications. I work with them on speeches. Sometimes I'll ghostwrite whole speeches for people based on what they tell me their idea, and they're like, speech writing, not my thing. I'm like, that's
Yeah.
okay. You're a rocket scientist. You don't need to be a speech writer. Tell
Yeah.
me all the information and let me do that bit for you.
Mm.
And then the stage presence and the coaching and working through whatever is holding them back so they
Mm.
can get up and make a really compelling and persuasive speech. So I do that both for private clients and also for my TEDx speakers for TEDx Brisbane, but also for some other TEDx events. So if you are looking to give one or you've been booked for one and you want to really nail it, people come to me to get that help and that support.
Nice. And how long have you been doing this for?
Oh, I have been doing public speaking and unofficially helping people through work and such for over 20 years. But my company started 11 years ago. And
Okay.
I have been also the CEO and doing the head of speaker coaching for TEDx Brisbane since 2015.
Okay. And your company is Full and Frank, correct?
It is. So I called it Full and Frank because I am. So it's
Mhm.
both a brand name and a product disclosure statement. And so I basically tell people what they need to hear and support them in their speaker journey to really take their public speaking to the next step and do it in a way that if you need to know something, I'll tell you. You may not want to hear it, but you need to hear it. So I'll tell you. I'm not this person. If you're looking for that, which might be what you want, I'm not your person. But I will tell you everything you need to know. I will tell you why it's important to do it that way.
Mhm.
It's all evidence-based. It's about neuroscience and neuroeconomics and behavioral persuasion theories, what makes people's brains be persuaded to say yes. And then
Mm.
I'll get people to get up on the stage, whatever stage that is, if it's in a boardroom, if it's speaking to their boss, or it's on a global TEDx stage, and give the best presentation possible.
Mm.
So I work with people I have like online courses, I have one-on-one coaching, and then I have a range of free guides just for people who go, I'm not sure. I just want to have a taste and see if I can just elevate this a little bit. So I try to help as many people as I can.
I love that. And the best places for people to find you, you have fullandfrank.com as your website. And then are you on social media and stuff too?
Absolutely. I'm on LinkedIn and Instagram and Facebook. And one of the cool things sometimes people like to do, if you're looking for speaking gigs, I have you can subscribe to my newsletter and get a list of globally all the different speaking gigs that I currently are looking for speakers. So if you're interested in that or any of the guides, you can go to fullandfrank.com/tools.
Okay. Awesome. I will link all of that in the show notes as well. So if anyone is interested in working with Juanita, you can definitely check out the show notes and click on some links down there or connect with her on social media. I love this conversation. Thank you so much for sharing your story and being vulnerable. I know obviously that's a hard thing because you just started doing it recently after all those years. And I am so grateful that you felt comfortable sharing that with me. What parting words do you have for our listeners in regards to whatever you want?
Your story is yours to tell. Own it. Understand the power it has and what it has done to help you become the fabulous person you are. And then go and tell it because somebody in the world needs to hear it right now. And as Anne Lamott says, if people wanted you to write or say nicer things about them, they should have treated you better.
100%. Oh, that gave me goosebumps. That was a really good way to end. Thank you so much again for coming on. And I hope you all enjoyed this episode, and we'll see you on the next one.